Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So, happy Halloween, and as has become a tradition on this channel, we are going to carve a pumpkin. But not only are we going to carve a pumpkin, but we're going to talk about my top 5 favorite fantasy villains. So, this is going to be a very simple, traditional kind of pumpkin, nothing very fancy. But I do want to talk about my favorite villains that exist in fantasy and pseudo sci fi. So, as always, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And let's begin. All right. So, I hollowed them out already because that's the messy part. So, we're just going to go ahead and start on the eyes while we talk about number 5. So, this is going to go from my least, well, they're all pretty much my favorite, but it's going to go from number 5 to one being my absolute favorite and the coolest, I think. So let's start off with number 5. Number 5 has to be Voldemort. So Voldemort from the Harry Potter series, he's pretty well known. But Voldemort as a villain is pretty basic. He is basically one of those evil for evil sakes kind of villains. He has some interesting backstory in book 6 that they kind of tell, which is a little bit more interesting world building that I like. But overall, him as a villain, he's just, evil for evil's sake. I mean, he went after a baby and then couldn't even finish the job. And in terms of villains who want to be immortal, he barely made it to 80 years old, so that's kind of funny. But yeah, so Voldemort definitely not, that amazing, but such a classic villain that you gotta kind of, give him some respect, at least a little bit. So he's number 5. So Voldemort is number 5. So let's move on to. Oop, I almost messed up. I should have got one of those carving kits because my little steak knives are not that great. But we got one eye out. All right. So number 4. Number 4. This character is Apollo, not Apollo from the Superpowers or Villains Code series, but Apollo, like the Greek god Apollo. But as he appears in the books of Cheryl and Kenyon. So mostly in Acheron, but throughout most of her Dark Hunter books, we kind of learn that the god Apollo is anything but benevolent or nice. He is a horrible, horrendous, petty little bastard who is a rapist and a murderer and just all the worst aspects of those kind of pagan gods that their reputations and all this kind of stuff, all the negative stuff. He basically personifies all of that. He tortured 2 amazing characters who were just very innocent, like normal people. And they're basically all the capriciousness of those ancient gods. Like humans are basically their playthings and stuff like that. So he's done some horrendous things for literally no motivation other than himself and being selfish and his own carnal desires and things like that. So he's never done anything good. He almost ended the world by the people that he went after. So he's just terrible, terrible person, but a really interesting villain. And he's also incredibly immortal. So apart from being a Greek god, he's one of the personification gods. So because he represents the sun, he basically can't be killed because the sun is tied to him. So if he dies, then the sun will die. So he can't be killed even among the gods that can be killed. So he's kind of a fascinating villain. Really, really terrible person. Fun to read about because you like to see it when the good guys get to kick his ass. So it's a lot of fun. So we got 2 eyes out. I think I'm going to need to adjust this one to make sure his nose is centered. So we're going to freehand this one. Whew. Doing this without a very sharp knife is quite dangerous. I don't recommend it. So, numero tres, number 3, the one that sits right in the middle. He has to be the villain from the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks. Andros Guile. See, I almost don't even want to call him a villain. He's really an anti-villain because you kind of learn eventually that what he's trying to do is ultimately good, for the world and for the country and stuff. But the way he goes about it is so horrible. He's such a terrible, terrible manipulator and such an evil old man. I love the fact that the one of the main characters, Kip, calls him an old horror. Like, I just love the way that sounds and with the way the graphic audio narrator does it. Like, it's just so much fun. I like it so much. He's so fascinating. He's such an interesting kind of character, especially when you still don't really know his motivations. You're just kind of like, why are you so mean? I like you, but you're so mean. Like, it's that kind of character. So it's a lot of fun to read about. And it's just like, oh my God, leave Kip alone. Quit being so terrible. Stop treating these young people so terrible. So he's a lot of fun, but he is like, oh, he is one of the most evil characters. He has done some interesting. It's not even like he's done, classic evil things. It's not, the torture and murder and all that stuff. Even though he's kind of had people do that, it's more his manipulation tactics. He managed to manipulate the entire government for decades until it was advantageous for him to reveal, the truth of the situation. So he's just an incredibly cunning, very smart, very well thought out kind of character. And I just really like what Brent Weeks did with him in that story. And I just love the final twist with his character. Even though there's a lot of parts about the Lightbringer series I don't really like. But I really love that character of Andros Guile. I thought he was a lot of fun. Even when they tried to introduce a different villain later in the series, he still took the top spot. Like, there was no beating him. So he was just awesome. So yeah, I really like him. But he can only be number 3 because the other 2 on my list hold like extra special places in my heart. Ooh, okay, so this mouth is a little tough. So, number 4. Number 4 favorite villain in fantasy has to be the Man in Black from Stephen King's Dark Tower series. So, the Man in Black is really, he's a villain. He is very much portrayed as a villain, especially in the multiple books that he shows up in. He's like the villain in The Stand, and he's kind of the villain in Dark Tower. Well, he is the villain in Dark Tower, but like he doesn't do a lot of very truly classical villain things, because in reality he's not truly a villain. He's a foil. He is really there to basically emphasize the lesson that Roland is kind of being taught throughout the Dark Tower series. So he's less of somebody trying to obstruct Roland's goal and more someone in the way that's like trying to basically, he is the catalyst for various lessons Roland ends up having to learn. That's one of those villain things that's not incredibly obvious until you basically finish the entire Dark Tower series. It doesn't become very clear. But when it does, wow, does it like completely change the perspective of the entire story? At least in my opinion, it does. It completely changed the way I saw the Dark Tower when I started to kind of get into focus and really see who the Man in Black was. And I just thought it was done brilliantly. I think he is such an interesting kind of foil character for the character of Roland, because the lessons we ultimately understand that Roland needs to learn, having a foil is very helpful. Oh, that looks nice. You can't even see the Sharpie that much. I like him. He's a very classic one. I gotta clean it out a little bit. You can barely see his fangs really. But yes, the Man in Black, aka the Walking Dude, the dude in the jeans. Like, he's got so many names throughout Stephen King's Dark Tower series and throughout his other series and stuff. So he's got multiple names. But I think, at least in the Dark Tower, because like I said, in other stories, he is truly a straight up villain. But I think he is a very fascinating foil to Roland. And as a kind of as a device for the type of story that King was telling with the Dark Tower series, I think he's just perfect. I think it's just so awesome. He's so much fun. Whew, this light got me sweating. All right, so we're basically done with the pumpkin. Very simple carving. I like the classic looks. I would do like a Stormlight, Windrunner glyph. Why can't I speak? I would do like a Windrunner glyph or something like that. But I just kind of really like the classic, pumpkin stuff. Just like very classic jack-o'-lantern look. I kind of want to do like the one from Halloween. Maybe I'll do that on another one. But let's talk about number 1. So, all these villains and kind of anti-villains like Andros are really fascinating and really interesting, and they all have interesting dimensionality to the characters. And I really like the way the writers, like who invented these characters, make use of them. But ultimately, my favorite has to be Ruin from Mistborn. So Brandon Sanderson created this character that is kind of a just entirely a subversion. So much like Voldemort, we thought he was kind of evil for the sake of evil, or more like Shaitan from the Wheel of Time, or Sauron or Saruman. So whichever the big burning eye guy is from Lord of the Rings, we were just thinking like evil for evil's sake, especially the concept of ruin being, ruinous or whatever. So we just thought it was a very black and white type evil. But when you learn that he's actually not just ruin, he is change, he is entropy, he is like the decay, the passage of time, and like all this kind of stuff. When you find out he's like, oh my God, it makes so much sense. And it just like lines up with what Brandon likes to do in his stories. The idea that this character is not just pure evil. He is a fundamental force and a fundamental part of all reality that is entirely necessary. So he's not even just evil. So it's just, it's such a cool thing because he was such a character that was just, very much a blanket evil, and you kind of just dismiss it at that. But you find out he's actually so much more complicated and so much more nuanced than that, and it's such a more complicated character. And there's more nuance to it. There's more meat on the bones than you would originally expect. So I really, really like that character. I think ultimately he is my favorite villain that Brandon has created in the entire Cosmere. There are some villainous characters that I really like, but I think just the concept of what he did with Ruin was just kind of, top tier for right now at least. So I really like that. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. You see my nice little jack-o'-lantern, very classic, little lopsided face and everything, kind of the way I like it. I know. Like I said, I'm probably going to do another one that's an imitation of the one that we see in the Halloween movies, with the Michael Myers silhouette and then the knife being the nose, like that kind of thing. I might do that. I don't know. But yeah, that was just a quick little video. We're talking about fantasy villains. Let me know in the comments down below. What are some of your favorite fantasy villains from any books, even sci-fi and all that kind of stuff? Let's go ahead and talk about it in the comments down below. And as always, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And happy Halloween! I will talk to y'all next time. Peace.